And we welcome to part 3 of the fixture reveal. And now we're going to be doing rounds 12 to 18. On Thursday night in round 12, we got Brisbane versus Essendon at the Gabba to kick off the round. Friday night footy, MCG. This will be the first primetime game we see Jack Ginnivan versus Old Side. Collingwood versus Hawthorn. On Saturday afternoon, we head to People First Stadium as Fremantle make their first trip back to the Gold Coast since 2022. As now we know it's a Saturday twilight, we got the Tigers travelling to NG to beat GWS. Another game in Sydney, Saturday night, Swans and the Crows. Also need 2 games each round in Queensland and Sydney these days. On Sunday, we head to Alice Springs. TAO Traeger Park, Melbourne versus St Kilda. And for the last game in the round, we're off to Perth for West Coast versus Geelong. And stay tuned for round 13. And we're on round 13 now. Thursday night, we got the Western Bulldogs versus Hawthorn at Marvel Stadium. Friday night, we move on to the Adelaide Oval for the Crows versus the Brisbane Lions. Saturday afternoon, we cross to the MCG, Richmond versus Sydney. Later on Saturday, twilight, where we go to GMHBA Stadium. Geelong versus the Gold Coast Suns. Saturday night, we move on to Monica Oval in Canberra for GWS versus Port Adelaide. Sunday, this will be North Melbourne's very first home game in Western Australia due to this new deal with the Western Australian Labor government. As we got North Melbourne versus West Coast at Hands Oval in South Bunbury. This will be the first ever AFL game to be located 2 hours away from Perth in Western Australia. The new second home for Perth footy. This could potentially, looking to get a gab around to Western Australia. Sunday night, we are at the MCG for King's Birthday Eve, Carlton and Essendon. Last game of the round, King's Birthday Monday, the big freeze game, Melbourne and Collingwood. And we'll see you soon for round 14. Now we're in round 14. Thursday night footy, we go back to Marvel Stadium for Saints versus Western Bulldogs. It'll be the first of the second matchups. Friday night, we are at UTAS Stadium. First Friday night game in Tassie since 2016. Hawthorn versus Adelaide at UTAS Stadium. Saturday, Gabba. Brisbane Lions versus GWS in the semi-final rematch, which was a very good game. Saturday twilight, MCG. Essendon versus Geelong. Saturday night, we're at Optus Stadium for Fremantle versus North Melbourne. We forgot to mention on the last round that Jack Darling would play his first game against his old side the previous week. The other ones I forgot to mention, Harry Sharp versus his old club in round 10. Round 7, Jack Martin versus his old club. And round 9, Jack Carroll versus his old club. On Sunday, we are at Adelaide Oval for Port Adelaide versus Melbourne. Sunday night, second game of the round at Optus Stadium. West Coast versus Carlton. And we'll see you soon for round 15. Anyway, now we move on to round 15. Thursday night footy, we're back at Optus Stadium for the second Thursday night game in Optus, Fremantle versus Essendon. Friday night, we're at GMHBA Stadium for the opening round rematch between Geelong and the Brisbane Lions. Saturday afternoon, MCG for this one. First time in 21 years, Carlton and North Melbourne will verse each other at the cricket ground. They were supposed to verse each other at the MCG in 2020, but didn't happen due to COVID. And we're at Adelaide Oval on Saturday twilight. Port Adelaide versus the Sydney Swans. It's the first time in 10 years that Port and the Swans will verse each other twice in a season. Saturday night footy, we're at Marvel Stadium for this one. Collingwood and St Kilda. It's been the first time Collingwood have a home game against the Saints and Marvel since 2017. Supposed to happen in 2020, but didn't happen due to COVID. Sunday, we're at NG Stadium for this one for the Expansion Cup. GWS versus Gold Coast. And the last game of the round, we're back at Marvel. Western Bulldogs versus Richmond. And we'll see you soon for round 16. And, we're into round 16 as for the final 9 rounds of the season. We haven't found the date yet for the remaining fixtures. As we'll check back later on in the season for the new dates for the fixture. Anyways, for each arm, we're going to be doing them all in alphabetical order for now. We got Collingwood versus West Coast at Marvel. Fremantle versus St Kilda at Optus. Gold Coast versus Melbourne at People First Stadium. Hawthorn versus North Melbourne in what would be the last Tassie derby of some sorts at UTAS Stadium. Port Adelaide versus Carlton at Adelaide Oval. Tigers versus the Crows at the MCG. Is this the time where Adelaide could erase their demons from the 2017 Grand Final and beat the Tigers at the cricket ground? And Swans versus Bulldogs at the SCG, and we'll check back soon for round 17.
Okay.
And now we move on to round 17. We got Adelaide versus Melbourne at Adelaide Oval. Brisbane versus Port Adelaide at the Gabba. The big one at the G, Carlton and Collingwood. Essendon versus Gold Coast at Marvel. Geelong versus Richmond at GMHBA. North versus Bulldogs at Marvel. Josh Battle's first game against his old club. Saints versus Hawthorn at Marvel. Swans versus Freo at the SCG. And the last game and West Coast versus GWS at Optus. And round 18 come up. And now we move on to round 18. We got Carlton versus Brisbane at Marvel Stadium. Fremantle versus Hawthorn in Perth, but Optus Stadium. Gold Coast versus Collingwood at People First Stadium. Giants versus Geelong at NG Stadium. Melbourne versus North Melbourne at the MCG. Port versus West Coast at Adelaide Oval. Port versus West Coast at Adelaide Oval. Tigers versus Essendon at the MCG. First secondary time game at the G for the season because of NIDOC week. Saints versus Swans at Marvel Stadium. And Bulldogs versus Adelaide at Mars Stadium in Ballarat. And we'll see you tomorrow for rounds 19 to the final round of the season.